I'm sorry, these guys look like they just got home from high school, and now that they've enjoyed a nice after-school snack and done their algebra homework, they're just jamming out, being themselves and having fun. But they just cranked out, like, this scowling, klezmer-infused, studied post-rock record with an infernal wrath. These tracks are these ever-evolving, vividly developed instrumental odysseys that use violins and saxes that sound deranged. The musicianship on this thing is punchy, and it's full of crooks and contortions. It's like complete nervous system stimuli. It also has what I think is a contagious and suffocating pessimistic disposition, mostly in its tendency to decelerate into these tiredly cycling defeatist guitar chords and Wood's despondent, shivering post-punk inflections. This record will cover you head to toe in a sea of blackness, filling your lungs, making them burn until you drown. They really just fucking freaked it. Amazing, show-stopping, 10 out of 10. Hope I see you guys in biology later. I felt like I caught on to more than a few hints that this band was kind of entertaining what I think is a very human instinct to lean into an ego or into complacency, but it's like whatever that would look like for a vaguely artsy loser. Like probably just having this inflated view of how cultured or highbrow you are, and what really sells all of it for me is just how self-aware they come across. Like, with regard to that, I always just think of just how badass it is to directly point out one of your biggest influences in a lyric, or I guess just to be so candid about having come from a place of privilege. Like, they really have no problem just laying all their cards out and kind of negate anyone's ability to use this stuff against them because of it, and they do it in style and with comedic value by satirically guzzling pop culture references and sunglasses, for example. They parody this specific little contemptuous rabbit hole that you can fall into, but I feel like in order for you to get there, the core of you just has to be distressed and in hysterics at the notion of accepting the truth and humility, and that's why I feel like it makes so much sense when the instruments happen to just throw temper tantrums. Like, the fanfare in Opus just straight up sounds like this herd of terrorized animals in a crying fright, maybe in like this ironically spirited frolic through hell, just laughing and dancing as they burn to death, and the eager-ass tempo on this track just makes them sound like they're wasting no time, moving out of the way for no one. And I think this track as a whole has this ceremonial quality about it that just brings it all together really well. And sometimes it'll just be like one or two saxes more modestly streaking a track in Anathema, like in the verses in Opus, or in the first build in Sunglasses, and these tend to have this melodramatic swoon about them that just makes me feel like I'm like looking at a Renaissance or Victorian painting of someone fainting, and I can kind of relate this to the mind just slumping into self-pity and becoming so bored and desperate that it starts to just exaggerate and dramatize every step of your collapse, when in reality it's very void of intrigue. And if anything could really be the abstract to this album, it's the song Opus as a whole. And I feel like once you've heard this album once, it kind of starts to haunt every other track on here that this is where it's ultimately headed. And specifically the line, "Everything we built must fall to the rising flames," because for me, the flames are like this constant nagging inside of you to be something different, something better, to keep evolving. It's like some part of you is ablaze trying to ruin anything substantial you're committed to just so you can keep running from disillusionment. Or it's like this underlying intrinsic tendency humans have to just destroy to feel new again. And those flames really only grow higher and higher. And on the track Science Fair, this is essentially resulting in emotional unavailability in a romantic sense. And the second segment of this, where the protagonist is either receiving or imagining they're receiving this aroused gaze from a seductive figure on stage, is meant to be representative of something a lot bigger. And that's the internal conflict that would come in any situation where real desire is on the table. Because, like, he knows how it's gonna end, and that he shouldn't raise anyone's hopes, but he still wants to go through with it. So he's like, yes, wait, no, wait, yes, wait, no, just mentally running in circles, and we've all been there. And the way the track starts by just being lacerated by these guitar chords mid-shatter that taste like metal could kind of represent some initial corruption of his thought process, because most of the instruments that carry out of that sound suspiciously demented and also tense, which I like to think could reflect just how deeply he's confined or screwed himself into this mindset. And as the simple prowling bass pops, the slinky clanking chords accelerate, and it's as if his impulse to just bolt in the opposite direction is patiently lingering in the back of his head, maybe lurking closer and closer, and becoming spotlit with that additional layer of chords, and he just knows that it could take over at any second, and the entire scene would just undergo this abrupt, embarrassing explosion. It's literally like the track has all of its air sucked in. It's holding its breath, starting to shake and turn red, and then that ugly instrumental convulsion comes in with the unruly saxes, and it's like his cognizance is being physically bent with those additional guitars jammed into it. This part almost seems unprompted, but if the chaos in your mind is this violent and unmanaged, parts of it are just going to erupt at potentially inappropriate times. And then finally those buzzing synths spin the instrumental into even greater lunacy, and there's this sense that his own thoughts are starting to make him dizzy. But I love how at the start of this track, by saying, "She was so impressed, I could make so many things catch on fire," he essentially spun this deep-seated personal issue into a self-deprecating joke, because that's really the only way you could ever suck something positive out of this. And also just the way he said, like, with the amount of issues I had, I was essentially just walking around covered in methane gas, and if anyone were to so much as touch me meaningfully, we would both combust. And this would have happened regardless, because human beings kind of fall in love left and right, just immediately, like dumbasses. So all this person had to do was come within 2 feet of his radius, and they were both pretty much in ashes before anything began. And comprehensively, I feel like it's testament to how clever this album's writing is that this track uses snapshots of these 2 discrete situations, one of a science fair, one of a stage show, that might seem arbitrary, maybe mildly amusing, but both are gateways to symbolism that's just dead on, and they can at least interact in terms of their larger point. And the way that Wood antagonistically yowls as if he's being put on the spot and snapping back, "I know where I'm going," or "I was born to run, it's black country out there," and you can hear both terror and complete certainty in his voice, seems like the most important thing that you could walk away from the track with. And this black country motif is recurrent through the whole record. Obviously, it's also in the band name, and I think it's likely meant to be this symbol of mass industrialization, a reference to Black Country England, and I think this is essentially meant to link the way this implies a perpetual need to innovate with this main character's need to constantly evolve and strip his life bare of anything remotely limiting, because he knows, even though it'll end up physically painful to live, as he hits the asphalt and he's surrounded by ruins and industrial smoke from everything he's already fucked up, he'll become aware that the only stability he'll ever feel is in his own bones, and all he can do is start putting willpower into paving new roads or phases of his life, and they have the chance to be superior. There's so much wrong with this if it's not already obvious. And I love the way that Sunglasses just draws you out of the turbulence of science fair with this flux of granulated, drony guitar and these trails of sirens, because it's like for a moment his emotions haven't really arrived anywhere definite. Like, that was so all-consuming that his mind just needs a second to be nowhere. It's like he's half unconscious, maybe similar to the way you would be like a split second after waking up in the morning, where you're still kind of in this dream state where all anything is a concept, and you can feel the fundamental highs, the pain, and the euphoria just melted together in a way that's solely intoxicating. But then it's like abruptly there is no magic, and the real world comes back into focus, and that's about as dead as it gets, and there he is, just beaten apart, sprawled out on the floor, and the guitars sound chronically fatigued. Every progression just sounds like being dragged through life involuntarily, and he delivers the words, "I'm so ignorant now with all that I've learned," as if he's wholly aghast that this time he believes them with all of his being. And it's just this moment where everything that he's so effectively deluded himself into believing is just painfully overt. And all he's really demonstrating himself to be underneath all that is just a lazy, privileged prick. I feel like you can almost hear regret in his voice, as if he thinks that all this time he spent learning about things he thought would make him the coolest person, he was actually just kind of being pulled away from making progress with something that has real-world value. So as he thought he was moving forwards, he was actually moving backwards in a sense. Maybe this is a dumb thing to dwell on, but we're human. And the instrumental progresses to the point where it starts to just fall to pieces as it's being stretched apart. and it just feels like it's thoroughly beating him down. It's very physical, and as everything inside of him was collapsing, he had to just scramble to find any last shred of strength inside of himself, and once he found just a bit of it, he instantly snapped out of it, prematurely decided, fuck you, I got this, even though he didn't. And with that, the instrumental pivots into this uprising full of stubborn chords, which develops into all these hazardously blinking, slashing instruments, and of course Wood's charged bellowing. It kind of feels like it's all just fueled by sheer human willpower, but it's like just witnessing his ego grow to a monstrous size and eat him alive. And all of those witty references that kind of show me another layer of their personality on top of everything, I feel like could read as him just brushing everything off on the surface, since they're definitely at the forefront of what you notice about the writing, but simultaneously feeling is expressed so desperately and hysterically in the vocals and the instrumental, and it's that dichotomy literally portraying how shit doesn't line up when you're suppressing everything that I love so much. And if you were just listening for the instrumental passages, I feel like its halves could seem fairly disparate, but like really this is a prime example of how well the musicianship feels like it's actively illustrating the lyrics. And Athens is a track that I admire for the same reason. I feel like its bare guitar riff just starts to feel excruciating through enough repetition. It's like you're just beating your head against the wall, or considering the lyrics, it could be like just enough pessimistic thoughts piling up in your head to the point where it's finally unbearable and you just get this stabbing headache. On this track, it's genuinely like his perspective is distorted enough to believe that like all he's doing with his life is giving shitty journalists something to write about and sparking idiotic discussions. Like, honestly, it borders on just straight up misanthropic. On this line, I thought he was saying that like, logically, I know that it's kind of indisputable that my album's connection to me and my name should die in that window of time after it's done, before it hits the public, just so I don't get to like mindlessly soak in praise. But make no mistake, he sounds like he actively, wholeheartedly resents that fact. And on this track, it's just like he's overly fixated on his image to the point where it's the only lens through which he sees himself, and any differences between him and who he appears to be are like the end of the world. Directly after that spiel, the chords and drums just kind of sound like this stepping stone to him pulling himself together and regrouping, but then the track just withdraws all of its momentum twice over, so it's like he kind of just lets everything go. I see this as him being overcome by what's waiting underneath his superiority complex, and that's just constant dissatisfaction with everything and shame that's all-encompassing like a body of water. I feel like if you can't get past this, mentally there's really no way forward. Like, most thoughts and ambitions you have are just not going to flow, they're going to flatline. Sensorily, this is kind of like he was just pushed out into some forgotten lake in a nowhere town just filled with dead moss and leaves and spider webs, and he just kind of drifts through it like he's a corpse. Then there are these shrill, floundering violins that sound like an animal somehow still alive in the water just thrashing about. It's like him being able to feel every last remnant of his willpower just spilling out, and then there's nothing. And those steady hi-hats make you very aware of how silent everything's become and how little is left. And then there is a careful, mournful ascent out of that, but the saxes sound like they're just pulling his depleted body out of the water and rescuing him against his will. Like, there's really no proud victory here. And with the line, "It's a great wide gulf between intention and what ground met me," I thought potentially he was getting at the fact that being an artist can almost encourage you to go towards what stimulates you and fills you with rich emotion, but like those things will never yield stability, so you're constantly a little bit in conflict. And I'm not entirely sure what the last lyrical passage is getting at, but if I were to take a stab at it, I would say that she, in this updated version, could like literally characterize or metaphorically resemble the heart of their intentions with this project back in 2018, and Wood kind of ends things on a hopeful note by saying that even though they've gotten more off track and lost more of the life inside of them than they ever thought possible, rechanneling it is not as difficult as they think it is. And those same confident chords return, but in the outro, when those sweetly twinkling guitar notes become central to the instrumental, it all gets suffocatingly wistful. And longing, I feel like, is the one thing that just persists no matter where you go, what you do. It seems like the one thing that's just gonna linger for the entire duration of our lives. And that's really what track X is a product of. I think that feeling is just so present on this song that it burns. It's really an unadulterated, idyllic love song that's just shown through these incomplete fragments of flashbacks. So, impressions of the love between two people as it would exist in one's mind, just distorted by excessive sentimentality and nostalgia. The glazed guitar loop beneath the track just makes it feel light as the brush of fingertips, maybe a little bit windswept. The instrumental just feels like watching the love actively budding and shimmering and losing track of how quickly it's multiplying, but then looking around and seeing its scope is just awe-inspiringly wide, like stars that would just stretch infinitely through all of space and time, and each loop could kind of be like its own constellation. And there's the illusion that it would just keep growing exponentially in the way that the synths get faster right as the track fades out. The circuits of instruments are so curt and tight, it seems to reflect just the tightness in your chest and the panic when it happens. And there's something about the way the vocals just sweep atop all of the instrumentation and the hook that I'm really drawn to. I think it's just that you feel even more under its control, if that's even possible, because I think that despite the fact that in love, the only thing that initially drives you to act is the beauty of it, there is definitely a menacing, invasive nature to it, almost like a sense you're being fed on. It feels like you're being metaphorically eaten by flies, and all of the feeling and tenderness in your chest is just being nibbled on bit by bit until you're dry. This repeated, I guess in some way, being the chorus translates so well because somehow this feeling that has no explanation is more convincing than anything else in the world. And sometimes you just connect dots for yourself because you want to believe it. It suggests that after a single turn of fate, they no longer belong to logic or to the world, only to this delusion. And then Opus hits and everything falls.